For USCFootball.com, I'm Jack Smith alongside Connor Morrissette for instant analysis from USC's Tuesday practice of rivalry week, UCLA week coming up as the Trojans look for one more win to get bowl eligible. Connor, they might have a third opponent this week. Lincoln Riley mentioned a little bit of a flu outbreak over the weekend that had some players in doubt for the Nebraska game. He says that it's as bad as it's been. It continued over the weekend, and as we were talking with Lincoln Riley, it's pretty clear that the flu has got him.
When Lincoln Riley came over to the media scrum, he had a cough drop in his mouth, and then he got rid of it, and right when he started talking, you could tell that he is under the weather. So last year he had the pneumonia, and that knocked him out for a practice or two, and now he's dealing with the flu. He said pretty much everyone in the program who's had it, it's only been a 36 to 72-hour thing, so he expects to be better by Saturday. But that third opponent comment is absolutely right, Jack. USC, as a team, a lot of these guys are battling the flu. Lynn said they've had to have a lot of Zoom meetings with guys. Guys haven't been able to practice. They moved some things around yesterday because of this flu breakout. So Riley talked on Saturday, like last week it was bad. It seems to have gotten worse. Hopefully, though, it'll be all resolved by the end of the week. But the way these things go, you never really know when you're dealing with that many players. So certainly something to keep an eye on. But, yeah, you'll hear the Lincoln Riley interview on our YouTube channel after you watch this, and he does not sound healthy.
No, and he mentioned that today was kind of the peak of the outbreak. And I think you can take that to mean one of two things. Either this is the worst it's been so far. I think he meant it as it was building over the weekend. This was the peak, and he expects it to go down from here. But Lynn mentioned that because of it, they're limited on some of the guys that they have in practice, and some guys haven't been able to go. And you mentioned they had to change around some things yesterday. So a really tough thing to deal with when you're going into a rivalry week. Lincoln Riley said no matter what, 7:30 p.m. on Saturday, they'll be there with no excuses. But when you're going into a rivalry week and a game that means so much to USC every year, but especially this year when you need a win to make a bowl game in one of the next two against UCLA and Notre Dame, when this one looks like the one that's probably a little bit more gettable, you'd like to avoid, obviously, having such another thing to deal with that's normally not, around. Even it is this time of year, it sometimes pops up for teams, but very unlucky break for USC over the last week.
Just something else to worry about. And Chris and I, as we usually do, we waited outside the tunnel today to see who comes out. And most of the team came out, and then we kept waiting. We were like, that can't be everyone. So not a good amount, but there are players who weren't out there today, and you just hope that they can get healthy by Saturday. But that is certainly something that stood out to Chris and I. We were just waiting there like, really? Is this everyone? Because a few guys weren't out there, and that affected them last week. You just hope that it doesn't affect them this week. Riley, though, he had a no BS attitude. He said no one cares what you're dealing with. You just got to get results. So that was, of course, refreshing to hear. But, you wouldn't wish the flu on anyone.
And USC's 5-5 after beating Nebraska last week. UCLA's 4-6. So the loser of this one, UCLA, won't go to a bowl game. USC will need a win against Notre Dame to go to a bowl. So not the most high-stakes USC-UCLA matchup, especially when you think of the last time USC went to the Rose Bowl and played in that 2022 great game where both teams were ranked highly. There's still a lot to play for in this one for two teams that are trying to make the postseason. Talking with Lincoln Riley and Lynn today, no players, they will be tomorrow. What were some of the things that you took away from hearing from USC's two main coaches?
It's a lot of talk about Lynn coming from UCLA and now being at USC as the defensive coordinator, and Lynn talked about how he's really happy that the defense now is playing together and how it was hard to leave the players at UCLA. Riley also talked about how impressed he's been with Lynn, specifically in the red zone defensively and on third down. UCLA has been awful getting off the field on third down. Their defense has done some nice things this season, but I think they're the worst team in the country at getting off the field on third down. So they certainly miss Lynn. And I think it's been like a year, it's been a year since USC played UCLA, but at this point, it's coming up on a calendar year since Lynn was hired. He was hired, I think, either at the end of November or very early in December. So just looking back on everything that's happened with USC, I know, Jack, we've talked a lot on our shows and on instant analysis just about USC's defense and how we wish the team had a little bit more talent, but I think it's undeniable the improvements that USC's defense has made, and that staff is doing a lot with players who maybe weren't projected to be doing a whole lot this season, so that's been really encouraging. Some of the freshmen are starting to play a little bit more. I think this defensive staff, led by Lynn, has done a really nice job, and that kind of came full circle today talking about his move from UCLA.
Yeah, it's been the better side of the football, frankly, for USC this year. The run defense has been much improved since the first half of what we've seen so far this season, been much better in recent weeks. They're not getting a ton of sacks, but they're getting off the field on third down. They've been phenomenal in the red zone, including holding Nebraska to 2 field goals in the second half on their 2 red zone trips. I think it's about a 50% touchdown rate that the USC defense is giving up when teams get to the red zone, which is great. And it would be a good number, but especially considering where USC came from last year, where they were, 100th in third down and 100th in the red zone. Now they're up near the top of the Big Ten, and that's a good company to be in with such a good conference. But you see the improvements that USC has made defensively with Danton Lynn. UCLA's defense hasn't tailed off completely, but in some certain metrics, third down defense, quite literally the worst in the nation, 133rd out of 133 FBS teams. They're giving up conversions over 50% of opponent third down. So you look at some of the numbers and you can see just how valuable Danton Lynn was to the UCLA defense last year, also some of the players that they had. But the conversation around Danton Lynn was, hey, is this just a one-year thing when USC hired him? The way that USC's playing and the way UCLA's playing without him, I think are very emblematic that Danton Lynn is one of the better DCs in the country.
Certainly, and with USC struggling, hopefully that leads to Lynn being back next season, whereas if they had a great year, of course you'd rather have a great year, but he would potentially be a head coach, or maybe he wants to go to the NFL. The doors would open for him, and they still could potentially because he's done a lot this season. But I do think right now, if I had to guess, he'll be back next season, and that's good for USC. Going back to UCLA for a second, Jack, we were talking about this before practice ended. You look at some of their numbers, and you just think, oh, this team, they really can't be that good. And they certainly have struggled this season, particularly to begin the year, and they had an off game against Washington, especially in the second half last week. But they did have that 3-game win streak in the middle of the year. This is a team, UCLA, that on paper USC is better than and they should beat, but they remind me of a Maryland where if you give them a chance to hang around, they can make you pay. And I think UCLA is probably a little bit better than Maryland. So it's a game on Saturday that USC will, of course, need to play well, but I think whoever makes fewer mistakes will win. That's a cliche. What I'm trying to say is, like, UCLA, they're not as bad as those numbers show, and if USC isn't playing as well as they need to, it's a Bruins team that can make them pay.
I think Deshaun Foster's done actually a pretty good coaching job, because you look at the team stats, they're in the hundreds in a lot of categories. One of the worst red zone offenses, one of the worst rushing offenses. We just mentioned the worst third down defense. All of those add up to a recipe for a really, really bad team. Now the record's only 4-6, but they won on a 3-game win streak, all in the Big Ten, including 2 road wins. USC doesn't have a road win this season and doesn't have its first Big Ten road win yet. This is the last chance for USC to go and grab a road win. And just a quick aside I posted today on Twitter, USC hasn't gone winless on the road across a whole season since 1950. And that's back when you only played 9 games a year, and USC was 0-1-2 on the road. So it would be an unprecedented streak for USC on the road. And the good news for them is it's across the town in LA still, but Trojans have really struggled on the road. So like the Maryland game, a team that's less talented when they're playing in their home stadium, even though it's probably going to be more of a close split in terms of fans, they can have life, and that Maryland has already shown can beat this USC team.
I was asked earlier, who is this game more important for? And for UCLA, of course, they need 2 wins to get bowl eligible, so it's important for them in that regard. But I feel like if they drop this game, they miss a bowl. At least with Deshaun Foster, he can hang his hat on that 3-game winning streak, and they're showing that they're trending somewhat in the right direction. If USC goes winless on the road this season and drops to, at best case scenario, 6-6, they would have to beat Notre Dame to get there. Like, that is going the wrong way, 11-1, 7-5, and then 6-6. This is a bigger game for USC, in my opinion. They had that sense of urgency. I'm very curious, Jack. Deshaun Foster, him being a UCLA guy, like, how much does that play into the UCLA, like, just the rah-rah mentality, them getting up for this game? We know they're going to be desperate, but having a coach who's experienced this rivalry, played against USC, we saw his comments earlier on, like, the smarter people go to UCLA is something that he said. I'm butchering it, but he gave USC some bulletin board material. It's hard to quantify that, but I want to see how that shows up on the field on Saturday, because Riley's an outsider here at USC. Foster is, a UCLA legend, and games like this, I do think that matters, but how much, we'll see Saturday.
Yeah, and can Danton Lynn maybe rally his defense around the fact that he's playing his former school? It's not like things ended on poor terms. He left UCLA to go to USC, but that's another thing that maybe UCLA can rally around is, hey, let's go beat our former defensive coordinator. He didn't want to be with us anymore. He wanted to leave. That's not exactly how it worked out, but you're right. There are those points there that UCLA coaches could make, and this is a big week for coaching and maybe a little bit of negative advertising inside the UCLA locker room that maybe USC doesn't have, and who knows, maybe USC can't focus on with the fact that they're trying to get over the flu right now. But I asked D'Anton Lynn about how much he can use what he knows about the UCLA offensive personnel, given the fact it's a new system with Chip Kelly leaving to go be the offensive coordinator at Ohio State, Eric Bieniemy now the offensive coordinator at UCLA. He said he knows the personalities, he knows the skill sets of those personnel, so he can use that to inform the defense, but completely different offense, and it doesn't seem like you can fully take what he saw last year at UCLA and apply it to this year's team. He also mentioned that the offensive coaches have asked him a little bit about the defensive personnel he worked with a season ago. Now, some of those players have gone on to the NFL, some followed him to USC, but there are still a couple of them there, and he was able to enlighten Lincoln Riley, some of those offensive coaches and players for USC, on some of the guys that UCLA has on the defensive side.
This Lynn part of this rivalry is unique and it's interesting. In the era of the transfer portal, Taylor Mays was talking about this on Trojans Live last night. You can kind of lose the sense of the rivalry a little bit because a lot of these guys weren't recruited by USC or UCLA. They're just first or second year guys who, of course, understand it's a big game, but when you're not either from Southern California or you weren't recruited by one of these schools, you might lose some of that rivalry intensity. But with Lynn and what's going on with Deshaun Foster now being the head coach and him, of course, starring for UCLA, I think the rivalry has some juice this year, and I'm certainly excited to see it unfold on Saturday.
And USC rather has multiple former UCLA players. Yeah. Kyle Ford, who's played for both teams on both sides of the rivalry, he's back at USC. Kamari Ramsey and John Humphrey are both at UCLA, and Jay Toya is, I think, the only player at UCLA who's formerly been at USC. So there are guys on both sides, which is something that's now available with the transfer portal. So you do blur the lines a little bit, but it'll certainly be interesting to see. Obviously, the flu is the main story right now, but hopefully that gets cleared up and we can focus more on the storylines and the actual game by the time Saturday rolls around.
I hope so, because it's never good when one team is dealing with a flu outbreak, of course, and what I just can't wrap my head around was it sounded like USC was dealing with this last week and it's maybe gotten worse, so they're dealing with it now 2 weeks in a row. I hope by Thursday they can put it all behind them and everyone's good to go, but we'll certainly provide updates as we get them, because Lincoln Riley didn't sound good and Lynn talked about how guys were missing and we saw multiple guys missing. They're going through it right now.
And Lynn knocked on wood after saying that he doesn't have it so far. We're fine for now, but we'll see how we feel tomorrow. I got my shot last week, so feeling pretty good about it, but we'll see if it affects us at all and what players we see out there. We did see some players wearing masks and just being careful, and I feel like if you're USC right now, you take any precaution you can, and then you try and make it to Saturday and then win the game on Saturday. But that's all we've got for Instant Analysis today. Certainly an interesting one with a lot of talk about the flu and maybe a little bit less about football. But for Connor Morrissette, I'm Jack Smith. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you check out USCfootball.com for more.